Click be recorded. So we'll start off now. So guys, you're very welcome to our webinar today, the second installment in our webinar series, Reimagining Sustainable Development, Achieving Resilient Communities. So we're joined today by Cathal O'Meara, who's going to be discussing his experiences co-authoring Guatemala City's first bicycle transport network plan, working together with local government and community members there. So Cathal O'Meara is an industrial designer and landscape architect, and he's been running his own studio in Fermoy, Cork since 2010, Cathal O'Meara Landscape Architects. And this primarily focuses on design-led work in the area of public realm design. So really looking forward to hearing from Cathal today about his experiences. It's sure to be really interesting. So yeah, we hope you'll have some comments, reflections, questions to ask him at the end for our Q&A. But for the moment, I'll pass over to Cathal for him to kick off, and looking forward to it. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Emma. Great. Okay. So I'm Cathal O'Meara. 10 years ago, I was involved with a project employed by Design Without Borders. They're a Norwegian NGO from the Department of Foreign Affairs. A really specific remit. They have partner organizations in Guatemala and Uganda, or it certainly was 10 years ago. And the partner organizations in both countries are universities and city government. And in both instances, projects are identified by those local partners. And then they come back to Norway, Design Without Borders, and say, hey, look, we have a project, we need a designer. So the remit then of Design Without Borders, they were specifically focused on employing industrial designers and sending them out to a problem. So I did industrial design, I qualified at that, and I also did landscape architecture. So when they were looking for a bike network planner, I applied and was ultimately taken on and sent out by Design Without Borders, the Norwegians, to Guatemala. A little confusing, I know. Because the local partners, the municipality in Guatemala City had identified, look, we'd really like to set up a bike network and start planning for cycling in Guatemala, but we don't have any experience with it. And I'll come back to that in a little bit because it touches off a few kind of important points. Okay, Emma, how long a presentation do I want to give?
If you want to aim for around 20-25 minutes, Cathal, that'd be cool.
Yeah, good. Okay. All right, so my involvement in Guatemala, I think, was 18 months, 18 months. And so tasked to come up with really a network plan for bike routes in the city. So I'll talk a little about the design process, ultimately the proposal, which was a document. There was a couple of ancillary projects that started kicking off before I left. Cyclist access to public transport and bike parking, and what happened over the 18 months I was in Guatemala City. I have some slides of what happened subsequently, which are kind of interesting as well. Okay, so Guatemala City it's just below Mexico. So it's North America, United States, Mexico, and Guatemala. Guatemala City itself has, I think, the country is probably the size of Ireland, but with steep mountains running through it. It's got a population of 12 million in the country, and 4 million of those are in the capital city. And it's a poor country, and it's got chronic kind of congestion issues. But one initiative they were doing when I arrived in the city was this thing called a Trans Metro. It's a local version of the bus rapid transit network. So BRTs, as these are called, were developed actually in Colombia under one or two mayors in the 90s who sought to apply the metro logic to buses. Obviously developing where less money, metros cost a phenomenal amount of money, underground systems. So they took all the benefits of an underground system and implemented them with buses. So what you have is dedicated routes, at-grade boarding with prepaid ticket holders. So the bus stops, loading and unloading it happens in about 10 seconds and the bus is gone again. So you're really leveraging metro and underground benefits, but facilitating it with a bus in a dedicated bus lane. Okay, so there was an office that I was sat in, really were the office who were planning this, because they're doing this new Transmetro infrastructure through Guatemala City, and they were piggybacking the bike network project within that office. So that's where I sat. So when we arrived in the city, there's me and my then girlfriend, now wife, and we initially bought bikes. We bought bikes. So we started with zero information on the city. We were fortunate in that we had quickly, I don't exactly remember how, I think we moved into an apartment in the city center, and Javi, the guy we were renting from, he knew this couple. The city center is quite small, and he knew that these were involved with Manifest Arte. That was a local group who would do, I think, a Sunday or a Friday protest. And that was a cycle that were critical mass, they're called in North America. They protest the lack of cycle facilities. So we met them and actually ended up buying bikes off them, Edwin and Jill. They actually, he's Guatemalan, she's North American. They ended up leaving after a couple of weeks and went to North America, where I think they still live. But they had this local protest group, or were instrumental in it. So we ended up buying bikes off them and actually started doing a lot of research with them, with my colleagues in the municipality here. There's a funny difference that happens in a lot of the developing world. I think something like cycling is perceived as a poor person's occupation. You only tend to do it really in Guatemala City if you've no money and you've no other option. Everybody aspires to be a car driver. So anybody who gets enough money goes and buys a car. So as a result, most of the cyclists in Guatemala City were like people who deliver bread, deliver ice cream, maybe a bike taxi, people who just don't have money for something else. So they're on a low strata economically. And my colleagues in the municipality had this, like, would go to university, they would often look like I looked. Maybe they wouldn't have blue eyes, but they'd have lighter skin. They're clearly European descent, a lot of them, and they wouldn't really have a lot of contact with the lower socioeconomic layer. So, okay, so there's information in Guatemala City that's related to cycling, but it's not held in the municipality offices where I'm working. So we did a lot of public cycles. We did workshops in local communities. I actually got the colleagues in the municipality out to cycle around the city. That was interesting because they actually don't really know their city center. They tend to live on the periphery in gated communities. Okay, we did workshops with groups, and we did regular Sunday cycles, Masa Critica, that's critical mass. And there were other groups as well that used to cycle protest, Manifest Arte. Okay, so we started working with a kind of a broad enough group of people in order to build up a database of information and to add that to the traffic stats that the municipality has. Okay, Guatemala City is built, it's like that. It's a flat city, but in between the city center, which is like flat like the palm of your hand, you've got these peninsulas here with barrancos, which are like deep ravines in between them. But the basis of the city is quite flat, like the palm of your hand, and it curves up at the edges. So the center of the city, the pink stuff, is 20 minutes in bike. It's easy 5K ride, quite flat. Okay, so a lot of those trips, this is again taking city data from the offices I was working in and making it relevant to cycling. So we started looking at how much of that of those trips that are generated in the city center, which is here, are less than 5K, and like we've 1.5 million trips less than 5K a day. That's like suitable trips for bike capture, in car or in bus. It's under 5K. We started doing surveys of cyclists. We found actually that there's a low enough amount of cyclists in Guatemala City, 2.8%. More cyclists are in the morning and the evenings. They're actually suggesting they're workers, not people going to work, but they're people who are working on a bike. And a lot of them were, again, harking back to this, they were in the poorer zones of the city. And it's like where cyclists can make up to 12% of the population. Okay. Yeah, so in economically marginal zones during hours not served by public transport, that's because they're doing this. They're delivering bread, they're delivering bananas. They've got these wonderful creations that they're making up themselves. And the local success story really for cycling is Bogota. A lot of the Colombian cities were on this 15 years before, like so in the early 90s, let's say. Mexico City came late to the game, but Bogota actually was the one everybody uses. Their mayor, Enrique Peñalosa, he actually in the 90s started developing for the poorest people in society. So he's quoted with all these famous things, saying make the footpaths as wide as your generosity to the public, the spirit of the publican is. So he started building for the lowest. He started building cycle paths, footpaths. Again, you don't have great footpath provision. Okay, and that was the local model we'd hold up. So within the workshops we were doing in the different zones of the city, we started doing trip generators, and we started using those trip generators as a means of identifying the strongest lines. You know, where lines were building up, layers were getting thickest. We started to see where the routes started becoming a priority. Okay, it ultimately led really to this network plan, and the network plan was based on, I think, 4 hierarchies. So the hierarchies really are separation, going from a gradient of fully separated, where speeds are fast, to fully integrated, where speeds are low, and that's really based on so full separation, where there's a lot of speeds or a lot of traffic, like the bike lanes or bike tracks, where you can mix them, where the speeds or traffic volumes are less, and full integration really, which is, I suppose, the Dutch model, where you don't always have full separation, but your speed's got to be low there. And the basis for that really is like where your speeds start getting over 50k an hour, an impact generally tends towards like an adverse, a significant really bad outcome when the speed gets over 50k an hour. That is also, so this is Danish data, but it's quite well used and reproduced data, because actually, like, it's proving the point that higher speeds and higher traffic volumes equal a worse outcome for cyclists. So that's where you need to intervene with segregation. So when we had developed the network, we sort of based it into a hierarchy of primary arteries. That's where the traffic speeds are over 60k. Secondary arteries, that's kind of where the speeds are under 50. And local roads is kind of going towards full integration, which is the old part of the city, the core of the city, the center. The proposal we were using really was where you have full separation. You need widths in the road, and it's full separation either by like this type of intervention where you have full grade separation. That's the bike lane proposal, where you have on-street integration of cyclists, and there's the third one, which is traffic calm streets. This is generally it's got the most amount of benefit because it benefits not just cyclists but pedestrians as well. But in order to do that, you need to slow traffic. You slow traffic at junctions, you have less straight runs. There's a cost implication of all of those, which we might come back to. Then we had a couple of greenway proposals through the city where you had old train lines that you could upgrade as fully green routes. So that really, I suppose, I as a couple of things I show if I have time, which are photos of the traffic condition in the city, separate to this presentation, and photos of, I suppose, the character and the color of Guatemalan cyclists. I'm just going to tie in a couple of ancillary projects we were doing at the same time. As I said, the BRT, the Transmetro, that was the offices I was working in. We developed with them proposals for bike parking. Specifically, we developed, really, I was teaching in the University Rafael Landavar, and with industrial design students, we ran a competition, bike parking. So they developed really a module for bike parking. What happened over the year we were there? The local cyclist protest group started getting much more active. they were there and they were active, but they were, I suppose, a part-time group at best. There's a channel of dialogue open between them and the city. This cohort of people, if I can be broad brush about it, they would generally tend to be living in the center of the city, unlike my municipality colleagues and my colleagues in the city council offices. And they started to agitate a bit more for the provision of cycle infrastructure. There was another similar group. A lot of the cyclists would overlap. These are like theater group. They would put on these nighttime and event-based cycles. And they started regularly cycling, as did these guys. These are an interesting bunch. They're more like the hipsters. Velocidad, they call themselves. So their thing was no lights, and we're going cycling at nighttime, and we're going hitting it on all junctions. They were really a hardcore element that you probably are not aware of a similar group here. Okay, so I started making contact with them and obviously doing local publicity, going on the TV and radio, and a few articles in a paper. It ultimately led really to as I was leaving, there was an upgrade of one of the shopping streets happening, and they started remodeling the 6th Avenue. It is a center shopping street, but it extends quite a way. So they started dovetailing it with cycle facilities, which was quite, ultimately, I don't think they approached it right. They took some of my advice that was suitable, and they ignored some of it that wasn't. I might just show you, I suppose really that's where I left the project. But as I was leaving, they actually started implementing things. So the project I was there for, I think, 15 months in the city. And over the next 2 years, I kept track on the project when they started to build out. This was the main principal avenue through the city. It could be 12 kilometers long, and they started to build in the green island that is contained within that central avenue. They started to build a cycle track, full segregation. Laying it in concrete. These are photos a friend took and sent on to me. Yeah, brushed concrete curb containing it. But this is okay, the first proper building of cycle facilities. They also inaugurated a separate cycle facility between the university and the nearby BRT. So the bus network that I was explaining was about 2K from the local university, which could have had 20,000 students. And they did a little bike share scheme. This is 2011 between the university and the BRT. So they started to do that, and that was what that scheme looks like. That was, I suppose, the end of that started after I left. Just want to give a few photos of the traffic on Guatemala and maybe a little bit of the color and the character of the Guatemalan cyclists. So this is traffic in Guatemala City. This is people wearing masks, 2010, it's kind of innocent, but that's because of diesel particulate, obviously. There's no provision within the road. You get kind of crazy conditions like people breaking red lights, that sort of chaos that happens. And you also have this is oddly, they were our offices, that was where we were located, but this is right outside city center, big public artery in the city, and you've got somebody trucking bananas by hand across on a hand pulley. Again, a bunch more photos of people cycling the city streets. That's kind of how the downtown looks. The downtown was a collage of kind of new, poorly built construction and older Art Deco stuff from the 1930s to 50s. It's kind of the recent heyday of the city when you have that architecture. One thing I didn't talk about was there was a push factor from the local, so the BRT was serving, that's the bus network in whose offices I was sitting. They would serve, I think, about 5 to 10% of the city because they were only operating certain lines like the Lewis in Dublin. This Tomatoes, they were called, these would operate the majority of the city. These are operated by private bus conductors. And that's the condition. You see how packed that is? That's kind of how Guatemalans get to work. But there was a problem. When I arrived in the city, there was a standoff between bus drivers who had decided not to pay protection money when they were going into the poorer zones, and they were being shot at a rate of 3 murders a day, 3 assassinations a day when I arrived there. This is March 2009. So they were being assassinated for not paying bribes to local gangs in these zones. So what happened as a consequence of that was the bus drivers started to pay a 15-year-old to stand there with a gun and to be their point man. So when they'd go into the zones, that guy would be like, crossfire was happening, you know. It was, so that was a consequence of them paying a 16-year-old with a gun to stand in the bus as their protection, effectively. I don't know how that ended. It didn't go away as an issue while I was in the city. Pollution is a problem. As part of the analysis phase of the project, we gave a bunch of local cyclists cheap disposable cameras. We got them to take photos of it to represent their problems. You can see that guy, he's saying, look, I'm going up the inside of a bus. The bus is stopping because the buses, although there's a bus stop there, they kind of stop anywhere. We've got a conflict between cyclists and buses. That's again an overpass of the city. You see the condition of traffic. One of the cyclists took a photo of this because it's like total chaos. Yeah, I mean, there's a hole in the road he can fit his bike into. Yeah, and you obviously have that sort of new development happening. That's again north of the city. You just see the smog hanging over the city. And you have the new shiny Transmetro, which is some achievement that the city was making some progress. A few photos I just go into so you can see that socioeconomic class who are accessing the city on bike. These guys are kind of unrepresented within the city offices. And there's a real divergence between the city and its professional knowledge and the people who actually use a bike. So I think one thing I will say is that I would be critical of some aspects of employing somebody from outside the system to go and address a problem in a different context. But there was an issue with the colleagues from the city not having that knowledge and not being trusted actually a lot of the time by these people. There was a genocide in Guatemala that ended in the mid-90s. So 15 years prior, there was like armed conflict happening. Okay. So that you see the people who are cycling to work on bike, they're painters, they're decorators, they're paint delivery guys, they're taxi men. That's the train line in the city, now defunct, where it was proposed as a ciclovia. This guy cycling his dog on the back of a bike. He's just a random punter. Yeah, some kids messing around. A delivery guy delivering crisps and Coke on his bike. Again, she was a local councillor in a poorer zone in the city. It's the same guy. I mean, all of this is tied on with a bike tire tube. Nice detail. Cycle protest group, Manifest Art Day. That's the guy with a dog. Look at the dog. The dog is actually holding on with his paws. Anyway, I'm just showing these photos because I thought it gives a lot of color and character to the city. These guys are a hardcore group. So they were probably more, let's say they're educated, they've been to university, but they've also been to North America. They had bikes. A lot of them were fixies, fixed gear bikes, no brakes, back pedal brake, maybe on some of them. And they would go without lights, nighttime, just for the sheer hell of it. So yeah, so you had different cyclists. There's a gas delivery guy, another guy with just a decorated bike. I had my camera with me a lot of the time. He was going around taking photos of people. These people were they would cycle to a part of the city and sell ice cream. I think these were crushing ice on the front of the bike. That was my colleagues from city offices who we got out of the city a number of times. We got them out to cycle them around the city, but they always brought policemen. Yeah, so that's a policeman's bike. Policeman was taken out of the photo, but these didn't know the context of the city, you know. So we were bringing them around the city. It was really interesting though. Fabricio was the boss, I guess, of the offices of the Transmetro. Urban Mobility was the name of the office. 27. He was 27, and he was. I was 29, I think, at the time. He was 27, head of the offices. they're given a lot of responsibility to young shoulders. And the whole office was probably most of them were under 30. Okay, I'll probably close it off there. I've gone through most of the points. The police obviously were on bike. Again, poor city sellers, just selling chiclets, chewing gums. Yeah, we had photos from the workshops where we got people drawing and articulating their routes. So that's really where it ended. Does anybody want to ask maybe a question, or is there comments on that?
Thanks very much, Cathal.
Yeah.
It's great to see it really coming to life there at the end, actually showing the characters you're saying, and yeah, talk more about the history, obviously, and yeah, the social context around it. But yeah, guys, we'll pass over to you now if you have any questions for Cathal. If we don't right away, I actually have one myself, maybe that I might share with Cathal. Just wondering if like more people kind of outside that like lower economic kind of group that you mentioned were galvanized to kind of get into cycling, like for instance, did that more radical group, did they kind of like bring actually more middle class cyclists sort of into the realm of the people, or did it sort of remain really actually kind of just, I suppose, almost with that slight stigma attached to it that you talked about?
So okay, when I left, the mayor, the alcalde, who's the mayor of the city, the mayors in Central and South America have a way different, I mean, they're mayors who have remit, and they essentially are seen as being in charge of the city. So I forget his name, but the mayor, while I was there, used his re-election campaign like the Colombian mayor a decade before him. Peñalosa was a Colombian mayor, and he was all about cycling, ciclovia, ciclovia, ciclovia. And the mayor in Guatemala used this cycling as part of his, re-elect me and we'll bring cycling. So they did one thing that was already really good, and that was pasos y pedales. So on the Sunday in the center of the city, they would close down the main artery for traffic, and it would just become public space. And it could be like 5K both sides of a dual carriageway. And that was just rollerblades, and all of those things are happening. And that's again a Central American, South American concept brought to Central America. And so there was enough things that were actually building in the background anyway for the appeal of it to be growing. I mean, that was the reason I was there. I wasn't the instrument, I was a part of the melody, but all of these things are happening independent of me. I was just one of the data points on that system. So that was happening anyway, yeah, as it happened here.
Yeah, okay, no, it's interesting to see that how, yeah, it's that kind of like the mayors can kind of shape it, obviously, whether if they're deciding that obviously it's something they really want to drive forward. But it's great to hear about that. Yeah, transforming the city centre. I'd love to see something like that happen in Dublin more, or in our cities here in Ireland, where we could create further space.
Yeah, that idea of this competition between cities is very strong over there, So they all look at the next city up, which is DF, District, Mexico City in Mexico. And that was like their London, So they look at that and go, we want to do a bit more of that. Or Bogota, which is quite further away. But again, those cities, the Colombian ones in particular, were really progressive and really pushing kind of these ideas. So there was a good background for this to happen, and they were seeing the political success of the candidates who use those items as election instruments, and use it to get reelected. So Peñalosa in Bogota as well, like I think 40% of Guatemala City was settled in asentamientos, which are slums, right? So what was happening was you get 5,000 people, and they had this number that they if they got critical mass of settlers without a home, they would go in and invade a barranco, which is those deep ravines, right? And overnight, you have 5,000 people with like all their stuff in the world that they own, and going in and building houses on a steep ravine. Okay, so that was a thing. And 40% of Guatemala City was built in slums. Asentamientos, maybe a generation later, they've upgraded the corrugated iron walls into block, and they've got some rudimentary plumbing and rudimentary electricity. But that was a model. 40% of the city was developed like that. Same in most of Latin America, same in most of Africa. But in Latin America in particular, okay, so Peñalosa in Colombia started layering this. He called it like urban interventions or urban surgery, where you go into these asentamientos and instead of trying to make them good, you just try and facilitate them. So maybe you have to buy out a bunch of people in order to get like a footprint within those areas, and you start layering it with a library. But you do the best library in the world. You don't do a cheap one. You do the best library with the best Colombian architects, and you make it a national competition, such that the library becomes like the church in the cities of old, you know, the center of the forum, the agora, the middle of the city. This is the marketplace. This is everything. And it looks, so everybody looks up to reading. So you start to layer all of these developmental instruments. And that was the basis, actually, Design Without Borders, set up by the Norwegians, Department of Foreign Affairs. Like we have, I don't know, we give charity and we give emergency aid. The Norwegians set up this Design Without Borders model to give the next level of aid. So you're not dealing with an emergency problem, you're anticipating a problem and you're dealing with it before it happens.
Yeah, absolutely, which is far better, yeah. Well, just one question from Liam before we maybe wrap up there. Well, actually, another one has just come in there now as well from Nagarjan. But Liam shared, thanks, Cathal, excellent talk. What findings would you take from your experience with developing cycling infrastructure in Guatemala into a strategy for Dublin, for instance? Or I suppose potentially Irish cities in general, we might expand that out to, but perhaps keeping it
okay, so I've kind of, the perspective I came back with was very much that we actually don't have a bad attitude towards cyclists at all. We give ourselves that attitude, but we're very respectful of cycling. I know that falls ill on most people's ears, but I cycle every day. My kids are like 9 and 6, they cycle to school. Okay, so there's ways of doing that. Leaving aside the 9 to 6-year-old for a while, most of our towns, right, if we can get the speed down to around 30k, 40k an hour, mixing is okay. Most of it is actually about managing the speeds of cars rather than trying to look for segregation. Segregation is brilliant, but actually it's not the easy win. The easy win is slowing cars down, I think, within the town center. There's different issues where cars go fast. You do absolutely need segregation, but it's not necessary everywhere. Maybe that's a learning I took back.
Absolutely, yeah. Just that simple kind of adaptation of working with what's there as well, and just reducing speed. Great. Well, we have one here from Nagarjan as well. Whether cycling is suitable for densely populated cities like Mumbai, Calcutta, Chennai in India, and densely populated cities in other countries. The point is, all the cities are not well, town and country, there's not necessarily good country planning. These are irregular and illogical constructions, I think Nagarjan meant. So maybe just on that point for densely populated cities, would you have any thoughts to share there?
It was interesting when we were doing the early presentations. I remember finding a graphic, a photo, right, of, it's a good photo, but it's a photo of a street, okay, taken aerially. And on the street you have the street filled with cars, and you've got a count of people. It's like 60 people can fit in this street if they're all in cars. Then you have a bunch of buses, and buses, you can fit loads of people in buses, but on bikes equally you can fit loads of people, right? Because the space is obviously less. If you're in a car, often there's 1 or 2 people in the car, so it's actually a really poor use of road space. When you have dense cities, you actually have to move to a different method of transport other than private car.
And you think that there kind of the key issue would be again around how to manage the cycling safety for cars that are still there, and how to again, that kind of point of how to bring down speeds of cars to increase safety for cyclists.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's different contexts everywhere. You're talking about really dense Indian cities. I'm living in rural Ireland now. I've no problem with the car. You know, cars are really useful. Really useful. I've changed my tune on that. I don't seek to get rid of them. If you get rid of them from the town I'm in right now, I'm looking out over it's dead. You don't get people coming from 10 miles away, which they do in rural Ireland. It's just a market town. People come in, do the shopping. We need the car for those contexts. We just got to be a bit more smart about, like, when you're dropping the kids off to school or those things. If it's under 5k, it's an easy one on bike. It's probably easier to do on bike.
Than in cars. Absolutely. Adapting.
Yeah.
Great. Well, There's just one final question, Cathal, if you're still okay for time there. Just from Becky saying, again, thanks so much, really interesting presentation. And just wondering how you heard about and got involved with Design Without Borders and the project originally.
Okay, so a friend, Sam Russell, he had worked for them previous. He was an industrial designer. I had a company with Sam at the time, or a few years before. And Sam had just come back from Uganda, or was possibly still in Uganda at the time. And he was there again as an industrial designer, designing a closed loop life jacket. So a life jacket for fishermen on, I forget the lake in the east of Uganda. It's a Lake Victoria, maybe, I'm not sure. One of the lakes there was a lot of deaths of fishermen. Life jackets are expensive. So what he did was, he designed a life jacket that could be sourced to local materials, made locally, and sold locally, and sold at a profit, such that the business loop was sustainable when he exited the scene. So those are the kind of things Design Without Borders were involved in, and that was Sam. And Sam said, "Hey, look, they're looking for an industrial designer to go to Guatemala to do cycle planning." I was an industrial designer. I was cycle planning with the civil engineering office in Dublin at the time. So I applied for the job, got the job, and that was that. Yeah.
Very good. Yeah. That's great. Great to hear about the project as well that Sam was involved in Uganda. Yeah. Great to see the opportunities there. So yeah, maybe check them out, Becky, if you're interested to see if they have anything coming up. But yeah, that's all from everyone at the moment. So yeah, if no one else wants to jump in at this point, we'll wrap it up and just say thanks so much for your time today, Cathal, and sharing your story. It was really fascinating, and great to see it come to life as you did at the end. So yeah, thanks so much, guys. And for those maybe any colleagues or friends that couldn't make it today, we'll have the recording as well up on our YouTube in the next day or so. And then our next webinar will be the 3rd of November, as to mention, Wednesday again at 1:30, the same time, 1:30 here in Ireland. And we'll be joined by Angus Mitchell from EWB Australia, who will be talking about their approach to technology development and sustainable technology innovations for sustainable development. So we hope you can join us for that. And have a good rest of the day, guys, wherever you are in the world. And thanks again. Thanks a million, Cathal.
Great. Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye, guys.
Bye.